All right, welcome back. Silver and black today, the post-game edition. The Raiders 23-20. They lose to the Indianapolis Colts. And if you haven't already heard that eliminated the Raiders from playoff contention for the 2023 season. So they have one more game next week at home against the Denver Broncos to close it out, hopefully on a high note for Raider fans. But this game, just not an exciting one to begin with. But number two, the Raiders didn't look like their crisp self. Defense didn't look phenomenal. The offense clearly struggled again. The Raiders have 2 touchdowns in 8 quarters of football, or 2 games over the last 3 weeks. And so things just didn't go the way it didn't go the way it did on Christmas Eve. And so your new year will start, unfortunately, with a Raider loss. I am Scott Gulbransen. This is Silver and Black Today, an Odyssey original podcast. This is the live post-game edition for those of you watching on YouTube, Twitter, or Twitch, or LinkedIn, wherever you're watching us. Thanks for being with us. We're here. We'll be in the chat up on YouTube as well for you. But as you look at what's happening here, we have 2 guests, as usual. My good buddy Murf from Raiders Fan Radio with our Voice of the Fan segment. Also joining us tonight is Evan Groat from Just Pod Baby, also one of my colleagues over at Sportsnot. So Evan's with us today. Murph, I'll start with you as we always do. You look at what happened here with this game. The Raiders clearly not the expectation, I think, of fans of what to expect after the Chiefs win on Christmas Day. Raiders needed this game, had to win it to stay in playoff contention. And it just seems like, well, boy, the offense struggled again, and defense just didn't look as good as it has in the past. But you can't expect the defense, Murph, to come out and win. You have to be able to play complementary football, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think that was one of the most disappointing things about today is that the defense actually played pretty well enough to win this football game, despite the points that were allowed. But costly penalties, though, too. It wasn't the best officiated game we've ever seen. But Jack Jones, man, a guy that was, he was the king of Raider Nation last week. And then this week, he's kind of the folly based on some of the plays that happened late. And really that field goal is every play matters, and I know that doesn't come down to one play, except sometimes it does. And so unfortunately, that was something that was costly for the Raiders. And yeah, not being able to move the football other than Zamir White until late in the game. And so yeah, it was a struggle. And I'm sure we'll get into the details of everything, but I think the overreach on creativity a lot of times offensively, it seemed like we moved away from that, and then here we buried back into that again. But in terms of a high level, though, just for opening comments, Scott, it's, as a Raiders fan, this is what we feel every year, and sometimes it happens earlier than it does later, but it's another losing season. It's another questionable coaching situation. It's another collapse after getting our hopes up. Oh yeah, we need a quarterback now too. So there's all these things that it's just another, regardless of, and I'm not trying to be a total sad sack here, but the reality of it as a Raider fan is that no matter what, despite the personnel, despite the coach, despite the GM, despite pretty much any a semblance of personnel that this team has had for the most part since 2003, it's a failure, and it ends in disappointment. And I know that listen, I'm not coming out with the expectation we should win the Super Bowl every year or whatever, but the idea that we should be competitive at some point with some sort of consistency, and we just haven't had that in forever.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's clear. Listen, Evan, you look at how this game went down. You look at how this team has played over the past 2 weeks. Clearly, the Kansas City win was huge. And the defense, we saw the numbers. I wrote a story on it this week because it was so impressive because of what the Raiders defense has been able to do. But again, back to complementary football. If you can't score, if you can't get the offense in gear, then you can't do that. I also thought the Raiders looked out of sorts. I thought this game management piece here between the offensive, defensive coaches and, of course, the head coach, Antonio Pierce, I felt as though it was, it was a little disorganized.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And you mentioned the defense. We didn't see those game-changing plays today from the defense that we had been seeing in the previous couple of weeks with, like a pick six or just one of those big plays. You didn't see it today. I thought that's what it was going to take to get the win. And then it was a lot of the same from the offense. Just struggling, especially in the first half. I thought they played better. I thought O'Connell played better in the second half, but just a little bit too little, too late there. for the offense. But, and I was listening to what Murf had to say, and I totally agree with him. At the end of the day, it's another season where the Raiders missed the playoffs, but I'm going to kind of take the opposite approach of that. And big picture of the Raiders seasons, I think, and I know they didn't get to the playoffs, but I think there is some positivity there when you look at it. Think about where this team was when they fired, McDaniels. A lot of teams are not able to overcome that. The Raiders nearly did. They were right there. Another 3-point loss today. Who would have thought the Raiders would be having their season alive in week 17, when McDaniels was fired and the offense was playing terrible, relying on a rookie quarterback. So there was a lot of things that the Raiders had to overcome. And I thought that, to have a chance in week 17 was something that I didn't expect. So, I know Raider fans are probably disappointed right now, but I think that when we step back and maybe when the season is over and kind of evaluate what they were able to do with so much working against them, there were some good things there, but it's a big off season once again for the Raiders. There's going to be a lot of change. Who knows what's going to happen at the quarterback position? Will Antonio Pierce, has he done enough to get the job full time? We'll have to see. There's a lot to decide here in the offseason.
Yeah, there is, and I agree with you, and I know Murf, you've expressed this when I was down there last week, and in between on your show too, which is, yes, you've seen progress. If you look at what Antonio Pierce has been able to do, especially on the defensive side of the ball, it's been pretty remarkable, right? The offense just hasn't been able to keep up, and I think it goes back to not Antonio Pierce not being able to run an offense. I think it goes back to you don't have the quarterback you need. If you don't have the quarterback who can make plays, and again, Aiden O'Connell, I think, will be a fine backup in this league. I don't have any issue with that. He's a rookie. He's going to make mistakes, so I get that. But I think you saw it again today. You saw a guy in Gardner Minshew who is a journeyman. I'm not saying Gardner Minshew is a franchise quarterback by any means, but he creates with his legs. He's able to, how many times that big long touchdown pass we saw, a 58-yard pass, the first one, wasn't a touchdown. We saw that. He stepped into the pocket when the pocket collapsed and there was pressure around him. He was able to move. If he doesn't move, he either gets sacked or he throws the ball away because he can't get downfield. And so, Murph, I think you look at this, and yes, fans are going to be disappointed. I get that. And to your point, it's well taken. At the same time, where this season was headed, and again, there's no participation trophies. I get that. At the same time, I think you look at the defense and you say, okay, they didn't play their best game today. They also didn't play terrible overall, gave up a couple big plays and penalties. Let's face it, the Raiders shot themselves in the foot. I know a lot of people want to blame all the penalties on the officials, and after we saw last night, the officials in the NFL are terrible. Don't get me wrong. And the Raiders have been on the crappy end of that stick many, many times. At the same time, the team wasn't as disciplined as it's been in previous weeks. So I think that the combination of that, you can't overcome a complete lack of talent. And I think that's what happened on offense because you just don't have the quarterback. Where on defense, you have the players. You saw Jack Jones, to your point. He had 2 big mistakes today, and that's it. But look what he did over the last few games, and I still think he's going to have a bright future with the Raiders.
Yeah, and listen, and I don't want to dismiss what accomplishments the Raiders have had here recently, and since Antonio Pierce has taken over. So I hear what you're saying, Evan, in terms of like there are things to be encouraged about. And listen, we were riding way high when it came out. Christmas night was pretty spectacular based on what the Raiders had done against the Chiefs. And when you listen to Antonio Pierce in his press conferences talking about when was the last time that these things happened, when was the last time these things happened, and they've been a rarity for Raider Nation. So I don't want to completely dismiss what you're saying about that. There are things to be encouraged about, but at the same time, bro, we're tired. This is Derek Carr type stuff. This is like, glimpses. Oh, hey, look at what we've got. There's something to be excited about. And then we're going to shit the bed right after that. It's like, and so it just happens over and over and over and over again. And even for a guy like me, who's, I've turned the calendar a few times and watched this team for an awful long time. And I know you guys have too. It's just the same thing. And that's where I'm saying is that the frustration starts to come out, is that I can look at things and look, it's one thing if you have a football team that was competitive and then has some down years, and then you see some positive things going into the offseason. That's one thing. But we haven't done shit sorry, Scott. We haven't done shit in so long that it's like this is just another damn beatdown and another offseason with question marks. And, I was so fired up, and I still am for Antonio Pierce, and I still think that he brings intangibles to this team that another coach can't replicate. But then you got Ian Rappaport today or yesterday, whenever the hell it was, dropping the freaking thing that Mark Davis might want to have Jim Harbaugh. And it was like, this was the game. If we could have won this game, and I'm not pinning this all on Antonio Pierce, I'm pinning on the Raiders, but as a fan and have confidence in what this team's got going, when you have question marks, and instead of allowing those things to fester, close the damn door on them. And the Raiders closed the door by winning this freaking football game, a very winnable game in Indianapolis, and they failed. So all we do is allow the critics and the question marks and all that shit to just continue to fester, and it's gonna fester. People are gonna be talking about Russell Wilson. They're gonna be talking about Jim Harbaugh. They're gonna be talking all this bullshit. I'm just like, gosh, stop it. Can we just freaking solidify a direction for this football team so we can lean into that, not only as fans, but even you guys as reporters and journalists? Like, there's not been a solid direction for this team. And again, I don't know when. You guys tell me, when was the last time?
Well, and Murph, I mean, you bring up a good point though, and I wrote about this when I talked about Antonio Pierce and the defense kind of sort of being the Rodney Dangerfield of the NFL, getting no respect. And I got a lot of feedback, and people were saying, yeah, nobody's giving us any respect. Look how good this defense has been. And I said, yeah, but you look at the last 20 years. So you're overcoming perception. And so to your point, I think that's what I talked about with Mo last week on the show, Evan, which is consistency. Like and I still think Antonio Pierce is a leading candidate. That's just me. Maybe I'm wrong. I know what the reports were and all that kind of stuff. I just still think that's the case. But anyway, you look past that and you say, okay, you have to be consistent though. Like if you want to do it, and to your point, Murph, you have to be consistent. So you follow up the big win in Kansas City. Now you completely kill the narrative of Travis Kelce about, hey, well, we gave it to him. So now that narrative comes back because guess what you did in your next game? You couldn't score on offense very often until late, of course, except for the one touchdown. So I think that's why it comes up. And I understand why fans get upset about that, right? But even from a media perspective, you're looking for that inroads, the incremental improvement that continues and is consistent. And with this team, unfortunately, they'll take 2 steps forward, 2 steps back, or 1 step forward, 1 step back. And that's the reality of it, Evan. And that's why, as Murph said, there's going to be more change. We don't know if it's going to be a coach or not. We'll see. But certainly there's going to be a lot of personnel change, I think, especially at key positions like quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, listen, anybody who listens to my show or follows me on social media, I've been a skeptic of Antonio Pierce, but I will say the last couple of weeks, I become much more of a believer in him. And I felt, and I know I listened to your show, your Thursday show, Scott, and you guys, you and Mo said, as long as the Raiders don't fall flat on their face in the next 2 games, it feels like he's done enough. And even though they lost today, I thought that they were competitive. It was a 3-point game, an onside kick away from possibly going to tie the game. So I still think, as you said, he is the leading candidate right now. We'll see what happens in the final week of the season. But I mean, he certainly has made a very strong case for himself. Murph mentioned the Jim Harbaugh talks. I think that's a good thing. I think the fact that they're being linked to a coach like him, that maybe he's interested in the Raiders job, I think that's a good thing because it shows you that maybe there's going to be other high quality candidates that want to coach in Las Vegas as well. And I think, they're going to go through the interview process and hopefully Mark Davis this time around will make the right choice. And that hasn't always been the case again in recent years. So I know there's not a lot of positivity there that a lot of faith in Davis that he can get it right this time. But you just have to hope that he can, and again, hope that there's attractive candidates applying for this job.
Yeah. And that's the thing we've said all along, right? In the discussion we had, Murph, which was you don't know who the candidate pool is, but certainly the way Antonio Pierce has been and how he's been functioning and the reaction he's gotten from his team clearly indicated that the things were headed in the right direction. And so you see this loss, and it's a big loss, right? And they come out flat, I thought, especially on defense. But then again, the defense has had to carry this team, right, over the period of the time that Antonio Pierce, except for one game, and that was a Charger game where they kind of quit on the game. But other than that, they've had to do it. So you knew at some point, and there was 2 games left, you knew at some point. And I said it on Thursday's show, which is this has to be the get right game for the offense. They have to get right because the defense cannot continue at that pace. You just can't. And so we saw the offense come out and just be unable to do it. It was, I think, a mixture of play calling, and I know everybody wants to be hard on Bo Hardigree. Go ahead. That is what it is. But then Aiden O'Connell holding the ball too long. You see a 4-step drop turn into a 10-step drop, and things just took too long. It's hard for him to process it as a rookie, A, and B, as a quarterback who doesn't have that functional mobility you need. So you look at those things, and it's not hard to, I think, dissect, Murf, why they lost today.
Yeah, you hate to pin it on a guy like Aiden O'Connell because I mean, he's a good dude, he's a good kid. He's only, he's dealing with the cards that he was dealt, and so I hate to pin so much of it on him, but you're right, that lack of functional mobility, the lack of downfield vision. I mean, we was Hondo and maybe some others on the Twitter there that we're talking about I can't remember the down and distance, but there was a play where Trey Tucker was running wide open down the sideline and like wide open. And O'Connell missed him. And we even saw Gardner Minshew do that today, but then he came back, Minshew did, and found, those deep passes and where O'Connell never did that. Also on some of those funky, third and short yardage plays, when those plays were starting to break down, there were running lanes. I mean, and you don't even, we're not talking about needing Justin Fields back there. We're talking about needing, I don't know, Derek Carr. I mean, I hate to bring the name up, but that kind of idea that somebody that can just take off and sprint up for 3 or 4 yards and get that first down. And that's what we're lacking. And that's what O'Connell is lacking. And I hate that for him. I wish he had better legs because he's got a pretty good arm, but he just doesn't have it. And so can you, and I don't even want to say in today's NFL, because I feel like this whole idea of that we've been really leaning into these conversations around the pocket passer and about how that's passed on in the NFL. But even then, when you think back to Steve Young or Joe Montana, or to keep it on the Raiders, Kenny Stabler, that was a guy that was elusive as hell. That was a guy that could take off when the play broke down. And this is you can't get more old school than freaking Kenny Stabler. And that's a guy that could convert a first down on with his legs. And so it's just not in the cards for Aiden O'Connell. And you mentioned, you think that he could be a functional backup. I think he could be a decent backup in the idea that he doesn't turn the ball over. And that's, right. I'll give him credit for that. And then the one interception that he threw today got called back because it was pass interference. And anybody, all you dumbass Indianapolis fans, booing that call, you can't grab a guy and freaking launch yourself around him. Like, that's not like, it wasn't even a questionable call. That was a good call by the officials in a bad officiated game. But anyways, point being though, that he takes good care of the football. So I'll give him 100% credit for that, but it's just not enough to outweigh the deficiencies that he has, unfortunately, in terms of field vision and in terms of legs. And I hate that for him, but we need a quarterback.
Yes, there's no question about that. And I, as I said before, too, I think that'll be a combination of drafting one. The Raiders need to figure out what they're going to do, perhaps to move up in the first round. And we'll get into that as we get closer to the offseason, clearly, but also bringing in another veteran, too, because I think they need 3 to compete in camp there. But you look at this game, too, and I think we saw something else, Evan, that was again, encouraging. Well, you know what? Let me step aside real quick for our audio audience, take a break. When we come back, we'll get on with the post-game show. Raiders lose to the Colts 23-20. You're with Scott Gulbransen, Evan Groat, and Murf from Raiders Fan Radio here on Silver and Black today, the post-game edition. Don't go anywhere. All right, we're back, and thanks to our YouTube audience, I had another issue, and it was funny because I was texting Murf yesterday about some of the video issues I was having, and of course, so our YouTube thing went out. The feed went out tonight again, of course, but I got it back up. So for those of you who are back and with us, we appreciate that very much. This is Silver and Black today, the post-game edition. Raiders 23-20 losers to the Colts. We are an Odyssey original podcast. Please subscribe wherever you get the podcast. We'd appreciate that very much. But Evan, I want to get back to you on this one. Zamir White, again, I think shows that he's got a place in the NFL. He didn't get carries before. When Josh McDaniels was the coach and they were going with Josh Jacobs. Now Josh Jacobs now out 4 games with this quad injury. Couldn't go again today. And Zamir White goes out there and has a nice game. If you look at what he was able to do today, 20 carries again for the second straight week, 71 yards. You'd like it a little bit higher than that, clearly, but the Raiders didn't get a chance to really establish the run game like they wanted to. at different parts of the game. But that's going to be encouraging to see Zamir White, knowing that going into next season, if Josh Jacobs is gone, which is my inclination to believe that that's going to happen, that at least you have a guy in camp already. I think they'll draft somebody else as well. But I think you have a young player there who is kind of coming into his own and that you can develop, and we'll see how he does next season in camp.
Absolutely. I've been very impressed with Zamir White these last 3 games when he's been given a much larger workload. I thought he's responded really well to it. You mentioned the 20 carries for 71 yards today. You'd like to see the 3.4 yards a little higher. But one of the other things I think he has shown that he can do, he can be a little bit versatile. I didn't realize he could catch the ball as well as he does. I'm looking at it right now. Looks like he had 5 catches for 35 yards today. So I think he showcased himself enough to feel comfortable with him going into next season. I do think it makes Josh Jacobs expendable. If you can look to save, $12 million next year that you can put towards some other positions of need, I do think it's a wise move. And so I do expect them to move on from Jacobs next year. He was a great Raider, loved having him, and we'll see. Who knows? You never know. Depending on who comes in next year, a new regime may feel differently, but it does kind of, the way things are stacking up here, it does look like this could be the end of Josh Jacobs in the silver and black.
Yeah, and I think we saw tonight or today as well. You saw this Raider team, I think, on defense too. The one thing that I will say about the Raiders, and even on offense, look, on offense, they're just not getting it done. It's plain and simple for a lot of reasons. But this team, and to your point, Murf, for as disappointed as fans are, I think a really encouraging point, and this is a credit to Antonio Pierce too, by the way. This team doesn't quit, man. I mean, even when they're not playing their best, you're seeing them go. And at this time of the year, you see some teams quit, man. You see it in the second half of a game. You saw it in the Charger game. Now, I would argue the Raiders beat them into submission early on, but either way, you start to see that. And this team, the locker room, and I know there's going to be changes, but I think that you look at what happened today, and even though they weren't playing well, they were trying to play through it. Max Crosby, of course, does what he does, but even that defensive line, which wasn't getting a ton of pressure on Gardner Minshew, they were playing tough, though, man. I was keying in on some of those guys and watching what they were doing up front, and they were giving it all. Defensive backfield, same thing. They got burned on some big plays. But they also made some nice plays too. So that's got to be encouraging for fans, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to see the team remain aggressive. And listen, you mentioned about seeing teams quit late in the season. I mean, we've seen plenty of Raider teams do that. And so that's definitely a hallmark of Antonio Pierce's leadership here, is that, we heard Jack Jones and so many others in the locker room, talk about it, that, he's an inspiring guy. And while emotion can be fleeting, there is something that is infectious about good leadership and that is sustainable. And so we saw that tonight, and I think we're going to see it next week. And we're going to really find out. I mean, I always say that, your character is not defined by the mistakes you make. Your character is defined by what you do in response. And we're going to find out next week, because it's one thing to close this, semi-close game. It's one thing to play hard through the remainder of this game. What are they going to do next week? Because now there's nothing to play for. Like now you got nothing. So now it's going to really be a testimony to Antonio Pierce's leadership and the dedication of these players. And I think they're going to come out swinging. I think we're going to beat the hell out of the Broncos. I think that's, listen, I mean, I think the Raiders are going to win every freaking game they ever play. And I think we're going to win the Super Bowl in the offseason. So consider my opinion of that. But I think that we will, for one way or the other, we're going to find out what this Raiders team is made of next week when we play the Broncos. And I think that going into this game, I was thinking, okay, like if Antonio Pierce, if we win this game as a follow-up to beating the Chiefs, it's about a slam dunk. And I'm still on that, AP train. I still think that he's the guy, and I hope that he gets the job in the offseason. But now, as we talked about at the top of the show, it allows for a little bit of question. Well, if you show that the team is still 100% bought in, and we go out and we dominate next week at home, against another division rival, and AP finishes with 3 division wins to close out his interim tenure, I think that's a very strong case still. So, although we don't have anything in terms of postseason to root for anymore, I'm going to be rooting for these Raiders. I'm going to be looking to see the amount of dedication and the lack of quit, because you're right. A lot of teams would just freaking roll over, but you know what? Let's freaking dominate the Broncos and send them a freaking message in the rest of the league heading into this offseason.
Yeah, and listen, I mean, Evan, the getting into the playoffs this year was going to be tough anyway. They had to win out clearly, and you looked at the Colts and you looked at the Broncos and you said, okay, well, there's a chance of that. But at the same time, the Colts play pretty well at home. They haven't played well on the road, but they played pretty well at home. And then you have Denver coming off the mess that they have with Russell Wilson, which everyone thought last year was a mess with Derek Carr when they basically did the same thing. With Russell Wilson, it's a whole different animal. And Jarrett Stidham comes back to Las Vegas in the same position he was in last year, which was taking over for a guy who's benched because they don't want to pay him. So you look at that, and you start to think about, okay, how does this team go out this season? Well, the team goes out this season by winning at home in front of the home fans at Allegiant Stadium and try to set the tone for the offseason and for their coach, right? I mean, this has to be, in the player's mind, it has to be like, well, even if we think Antonio Pierce might get the job, if that's what they're thinking, then we got to make it a slam dunk, as Murf said earlier, and win this game so that he goes out on top. He doesn't go out losing 2 in a row.
Yeah, I agree with everything Murph said there. I do expect the Raiders to come out and to play this game like they still have a chance at the playoffs, because to me, that's been the most impressive thing about Antonio Pierce is oftentimes when there's a coach that's fired and then there's a interim put in place, you often see like that initial burst of, effort and energy. Maybe it lasts 1 or 2 games, but normally it kind of tails off. That has not happened with this team. They have continued to play inspired and motivated, and that all goes to credit goes to Antonio Pierce for that. And that's what's kind of made me change my mind more and more about Pierce, is that I just didn't think he'd be able to, the team would be able to sustain that type of effort and motivation because of the lack of, what I thought was talent in certain areas on the roster. They've overcome that. He's gotten guys who might not be elite level players to play great, like a Robert Spillane on defense. I mean, he's gotten the most out of a lot of these players, especially on the defensive side of the ball, which has become the strength of this team. So I've been impressed by that. And again, I do think they're going to come out and they're going to play inspired next week. And I do think next week's game matters a lot. It's going to be huge. I don't think this decision is made. I think it's going to come right down to what happens in next week's game. It's going to be a big game for sure.
Yeah, I do. I think that too, and I think that there's some players on this roster too. Do they want to be back? Obviously, Josh Jacobs. I don't think Josh Jacobs plays again. I said it 2 weeks ago. I said I don't think he'll play again as a Raider because with that quad injury, knowing he's going to be a free agent, now they're out of the playoffs. What does he have to come back? So if he doesn't play next week, I think if you're a big Josh Jacobs fan, I think that's an ominous sign. We've also seen Colton Miller, who came in an emergency situation today, but he hasn't played for 4 games as well. That's different because he's got a shoulder injury. Probably going to have, I bet you we hear he's going to have surgery after the season, even though that hasn't been said yet. But clearly, there's some guys that need to kind of ball out, I think, in that last game, too, if they want to come back. Amik Robertson, who's been played well, and he's up for a contract extension. So Murph, not only are they going to be playing, I think, for Antonio Pierce to kind of give him an opportunity to earn the job and to finish really strong so that helps him. But again, they're also playing for that roster spot. And you can't say it enough when a locker room goes through all that stuff, just like we saw in 2021, they play for each other. And so I'm really interested. If the Raiders were to come out and look really bad next week, that would be a weird sign to me. I don't see that happening. I could see what happened today where they play hard, but their offense can't get it done because that's what the story of the season has been. But you agree with me on that, Murph? You think this team's going to come out and do what they can for their coach and for one another?
Absolutely, 100%. And because, like you mentioned, that so many guys are going to be playing for jobs, whether that's with the Raiders or that's, if there is a new coaching regime that comes in, they're going to want to identify their players. And listen, at the end of the day, and this is where the whole tanking thing, that when people talk about tanking and, laying down and playing for the draft and all that stuff, it's such a ridiculous sentiment because your career is defined by your tape. Like what you do on the grass, as Antonio Pierce will tell you, my resume is on the grass. Well, so are the players. Their resume is on the grass. And so they're going to want to go out strong. And especially we've seen the unity that has come to this team behind this head coach. So we know it's without a doubt in my mind that they're going to play for this coach. Now, are they going to run out of talent? As I've said, a handful of times, they might. I mean, we ran out of talent today at quarterback. That's just the bottom line. You run out of talent. There's only so far you can go with the talent that you have. And so can they absolutely give their best and run out of talent? Yes, that's 100% possible. But we've also seen this team not run out of talent in terms of outplaying their talent ability in what they did in Kansas City. And not that, regardless of what happened today and even what's going to happen next Sunday, that will not change. That we went into Kansas City and shut up, Travis Kelce. You didn't give away a damn thing. That whole idea, that concept is so lame. And really, and I want to get on a whole tangent here, but haven't we really seen the true character of the Chiefs and also their media? Like, you idiots don't know how to handle losing. You don't know what it's like. And so your character is revealed. You're a bunch of pouty bitches. I can't believe the way that the media and the players have responded to adversity. Again, talk about defining your character. What you do in the face of adversity defines you. And these guys have failed miserably. But anyways, it ain't about the Chiefs. It's about the Raiders. And so that win and what the Raiders did in Kansas City, that's never going to be taken away from us. That the idea that we pillaged just for fun against the Chargers and then we swaggered boisterously in Kansas City, those two things we hadn't seen in a long, long time. And so those things cannot be taken away from the Raiders. So I think that's ultimately what's going to define our season, along with how now we respond to adversity after getting knocked out. What do we do when nothing is on the line and playing for a home crowd at Allegiant Stadium, Scott? So I'm with you, dude. I think they're going to come out swinging, and there's going to be very little orange in the stadium, hopefully.
Yeah, and Evan, give me your thoughts on that too, because I think, like you said, they have plenty to play for, which is the coach and themselves. What are you going to look for in that final game next weekend to kind of give you a sense for how you should feel going into the offseason?
See, Murf is looking for the silver lining now. Before, at the top of the show, he was a little bit more negative, down about the win. Now he's talking about the win over Kansas City and the win over the Chargers. That's going to carry him into the offseason. That's going to keep that smile on his face for the next couple of months.
Damn you, Evan, I hate it. It's a curse.
What am I looking for? I want to see how this, as Murf has been saying, how do they respond here? They know the season is now over for them. Playing for jobs, playing for pride, and how do they come out and play for their head coach? Now, the last 8 games, they've played hard for this guy, and they have made the point that they want him around. And I want to see if that continues in this final game. I expect it will, because I think about some of the guys that they have in the locker room. If you've listened to anything that Max Crosby has said over the last several weeks, he's not going to let those guys on defense, I know that, not play 100%. So I do expect the team to come out and play hard. And if they don't, then I would be extremely disappointed to see that.
Yeah, I would be surprised too. I mean, that's to me not in the character of how this team has played. Have they played poorly at times? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. But I don't ever, going back a few seasons, I saw times where I thought some of the guys quit. Now, of course, Marcus Peters did, and he found himself on the street. So that tells you that they're not tolerating that inside the house, which is a good thing to do. Murf, as we do, by the way, we when we get super chats here on YouTube, we donate them all to the One Nation Foundation, which you're getting ready. We got to be able to send that check next month. But when we do that, here, you guys are probably asking, if you're new to the channel, whatever you're asking, what is the One Nation Foundation? Of course, Murf hosts Raiders Fan Radio along with Michelle and Swag Jeff, which you can catch them on their podcast. You can also subscribe to them on their YouTube channel. But everything they do is to raise money for the One Nation Foundation. So this is the point of the show where we're going to tell you about that. So Murf, let everybody know what you guys are doing at the One Nation Foundation in case they're new to it.
Oh, thank you so much, Scott. We always appreciate the platform and appreciate your kindness and generosity to the foundation. So we figured out we could make some money doing our show, Raiders Fan Radio, and we quickly decided that we wanted to give all that money away. So we give it all strictly to Raiders-related charities like the Max Crosby Foundation, the good folks at Raider Dad, and the biggest charity that we give to is the Bolitnikoff Foundation, who gives safe places and rehabilitative services to young women at risk of domestic violence and substance abuse. And so we can't be more thankful to be partnered up with these amazing organizations, and every dollar that we raise with this show goes to that. So whether you buy our merchandise on our TeePublic site, by going to RaidersFanRadio.com, and you can find our stuff there, any of the super chats that we get, the amazing generosity from Scott and Silver and Black Today, our corporate sponsors, All of it goes to the One Nation Foundation. We presented the Bolitnikovs with a check for $15,000 this year, and I look forward to growing that and getting that bigger and better each and every year. And we can't do that without your help, Raider Nation. And even if you can't support the foundation monetarily, all we ask is that you hit a like, hit a subscribe, hit a thumbs up. It's not about raising awareness for our show. It's to generate advertising opportunities so we can make some money and give it away to these amazing organizations. And whether you do that through Raiders Fan Radio or you do that here at Silver and Black today, all of it counts. And we thank you so very, very much for your support. We love you guys. And thank you again, Scott, for asking about it. Oh,
no, we appreciate it too, guys. So make sure you do that. Make sure you follow Murf and the team. Evan also is the host of the Just Pod Baby podcast. But tell everybody about the podcast, Evan. If they don't already listen to it, already subscribe to it, where can they find it?
You can find it on all the major platforms. As you know, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, all the big ones. I put out one show a week. Usually it's on Thursday nights. I'm on the East Coast, so it comes out a little bit later on East Coast time Thursday nights, earlier in the evening for you out there on the West Coast. And, I try to always bring on guests. My show is centered around guests, and I'm looking forward to gearing up for what's going to be another really big offseason for the Raiders.
Yeah, and of course, the podcast is part of Sportsnaut as well, too, sponsored by Sportsnaut, so make sure you check out sportsnaut.com. Right. Gentlemen, I want to be the first to wish you a happy new year, and thank you guys for being with us here on the show. Unfortunately, Raiders did not win today, so that I know takes a little bit down. But I know by midnight when we turn the calendar, you guys will be feeling just fine, won't you?
If I'll be in bed.
I'm kind of old, Scott, and I started drinking when the game started, so I don't know if I'm going to make it.
I love it. And we'll, Murf, I know we'll catch up with you next week after the Broncos game. Evan, my friend, take care. Happy New Year, and we will talk to you guys later.
Happy New Year, guys.
Happy New Year, everybody. Good night, Raider Nation. Love you. Let's go beat the hell out of the Broncos.
There you go. There you have it. That was Murf and Evan. Thanks so much for them for coming on. And thanks to you guys for watching us again on YouTube. Also listening to us on our Odyssey Originals podcast feed. If you're listening to us on audio on New Year's Day, then you're listening to us into the new year. So happy New Year to you and yours as well. Just want to give you thanks. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast wherever you get it. Also subscribe up on YouTube. And sorry, we had another issue. That's two streams in a row we've had some issues. So I'm working on it on my side as well. So we appreciate you being patient and getting on with us after we had to reestablish it. So thank you for that. But I want to thank our producer, Mike Robier. Also, Mo Moten and I will be back on Tuesday. So make sure you check into our first show of the new year. For Murf, for Evan, I am Scott Gulbransen. Have a great 2024, Raider Nation. I have some confidence that it's going to turn around in 2024. So hang in there. And thanks as always for listening. Take care.